Alright, what kind of monkey is Curious George? So, for those who don't know, Curious George is a monkey from a series of children's books and related media. This includes TV shows, movies, more children's books, etc. The first book was made by a husband-wife couple in 1941, or rather released then, so presumably they made it over the course of years before then. And that will be important, because, well, you'll see why, but basically we need to take into account what they knew back in the 1930s and 40s. Now, the key thing about Curious George is they never specify what type of monkey he is. Like, they'll say he's a monkey, they'll show pictures of him, but never tell you what type he is. So, we're going to try to figure out what type he is today. First, we need to establish what is the difference between a monkey and an ape. Most people think of it as apes have no tails and monkeys have tails, but it's a bit more complicated, especially since if you watch Clint's Reptiles, you'll know that you cannot evolve out of a clade, which means that humans are a type of fish, and technically speaking, for our purposes, more importantly, apes are a type of monkey. But to put it in terms of how most people think of it, brought to a more scientific mindset, apes are a relative of monkey, another type of primates, and while some monkeys don't have tails, there are no apes with tails aside from mutant humans, and probably mutant other apes too, or something. So anyway, Curious George's phenotypic characteristics. So phenotypic is how he looks. You'll notice that I have both the original depiction of him on the left, and on the right, more modern depictions of him. So, Curious George has brown fur, a relatively furless face along with hands and feet, and note the shape of the face. It looks relatively human, more like humans than many other types of apes. And in particular, the far left image looks a bit like a child. So you notice brown fur, lack of fur on hairs, and you also notice, you can't see it well in this picture, but Yasho was fairly short. Now, Curious George's behavioral characteristics. First, Curious George is very curious, but this does not narrow it down for us. He's so curious that it's even in his name, but all primates, monkeys and apes and prosimians alike, are curious to some extent or another. It comes with high intelligence. And I bring up this particular picture, which is like one of the covers of the original Curious George books, to point something else out about him. Curious George is not very aggressive. He never bites anyone in the books, to my knowledge, or any of the other media featuring him. Never beats the crap out of anyone. Never really acts all that aggressive. And you'll notice in this scene, these two guys who are firefighters are dragging him away after grabbing him. And Curious George isn't resisting. So, he is a relatively docile animal, especially compared to certain monkeys and apes. So now, his environment. Well, Curious George is from sub-Saharan Africa, almost certainly, most likely the Congo. As you can see here, Curious George is consistently depicted as living in the wilds of the jungle. Here he is on the left in one of the original covers, collector's edition. We have the jungle plants, and in the original book, as well as in other media, you do see other wildlife that is native to Africa. Like giraffes, gorillas, and also rhinos, elephants, and flamingos, though there are rhinos, elephants, and flamingos outside of Africa. That's why the giraffe and gorilla are important, because they are from Africa. Now, I know that humans are from Africa too, as you see in that image. However, the man in the yellow hat, as far as I know, was born in America. So anyway, first, is Curious George a gorilla? No. Just no. He doesn't resemble a gorilla in any way. Not in fur color, not in facial features, not in size either. Now you might ask, well, maybe he's just a baby gorilla. and that's why he's so short, but I seriously doubt that, especially since his other features don't quite match up with baby gorillas. The only similarity he has with gorillas is how docile he is, though I should note that Curious George is a bit exaggerated in his lack of aggression. So, like, because any animal will attack you if you provoke it enough. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a monkey, an ape, a rabbit, a fox, a bat, literally a rat. Any animal will at least bite you if you provoke it enough. So we'll get back to that a bit later. Now, is Curious George a chimpanzee? This is actually a pretty good choice, because you'll notice that in some of these pictures, first off, the chimpanzees match his phenotypic characteristics. It's like they have somewhat similar facial features, especially with that little groove there in the later depictions and their eyes. They also do sometimes have fur that can look brown. Their hands are uncovered, feet are... Yeah, and so it might seem like he's a chimpanzee. However, there are some things... Oh, and also, chimpanzees live in the right area of Africa to be Curious George. They live in the Congo and similar jungle regions. But there is one thing that makes me doubt it. Simply put, Curious George isn't aggressive enough. Now, we'll get back to this topic, but the firefighters here in this image you'll see, people Curious George doesn't know, grab him by the arm and start dragging him off. I guarantee you that if you do that to a chimpanzee, at bare minimum, it would bite the living shit out of you. Like, the firefighters wouldn't make it out of this situation without a few scratch marks or bite marks, and quite possibly would be far more damaged. So now, is Curious George a Barbary macaque? So, Barbary macaques have similar brown fur, not quite as brown as George's is, but that could be cartoon exaggeration. Also, Barbary macaques are monkeys, like legitimate full monkeys, even by the definition that most people use, and they don't have tails. Like, they are legitimate tailless monkeys, which backs up Curious George's stuff there, like his phenotype. Also, Barbary macaques are, from what I've heard, not as aggressive as other types of macaques. They'll still bite you if you provoke them enough, like I said before, but they aren't as likely to do it as other macaques, which would fit more of Curious George's facile nature. Now, here's the problem. First off, while Curious George is less aggressive than other macaques, he still isn't quite aggressive enough to be a Barbary macaque, so that's an issue. Another one is their range. Barbary macaques are found in North Africa and Spain. During the 1930s and 40s, Barbary macaques would have likely have had a larger range in North Africa and smaller in Spain. However, they still aren't found in the jungles of sub-Saharan Africa. Like, they are found in forests in North Africa and in Spain and mountains, but they're in the wrong location to be Curious George. So, we can basically say that he isn't a Barbary macaque. And also, I noted in this slide that there are parts of Africa covered in rainforest, in case you didn't believe me in the last one. So, you'll note that North Africa has no rainforests. All the rainforests are in Central Africa, or West Africa, but not North Africa, or Madagascar, but not North Africa. Now, is Curious George a bonobo? So, bonobos are a bit of a lesser-known species of chimpanzee. Well, sorry, they're not a species of chimpanzee, they're a relative of chimpanzees. Very close relative. And they're so close that at one point they were actually classified as a subspecies of chimpanzee. So, in Curious George's case, he does have somewhat similar facial features to bonobos. Now, he doesn't have the right fur color. I couldn't find any evidence that there are any bonobos with even close to brown fur. So, you could say artistic license, but he doesn't quite fit that either. So, Now, the key thing in which Curious George matches bonobos is behavioral. So bonobos are not very aggressive. In fact, they're fairly passive, which very much fits Curious George. It should also be noted that the reason why bonobos are so lesser known and rare is because they only live in this very isolated valley in Africa. And if they left that valley, they'd probably all get eaten by the chimpanzees, who are larger, stronger, and more aggressive than them. Now, once again, a bonobo will attack you if you provoke it enough, but they're still not as aggressive as chimpanzees are. So, and they also live in a similar general region to chimps, so they actually do fit the environment. So then, since they fit everything except phenotype, is he a bonobo? Probably. However, now we need to talk about the 1940s and 30s knowledge of animals at the time. Because we know more now than we do then. And at the time of the 30s and 40s, chimpanzees were generally thought of as being more peaceful than they are nowadays. Like, nowadays we know just how violent chimpanzees are, but back then they didn't. It wasn't until Jane Goodall started studying them that we had an idea of how violent they are. And even then, Jane Goodall herself was pretty shocked by it, and a lot of people didn't believe her. Like, they thought her studies were too invasive, and to be fair, they were a bit invasive. But later studies ended up confirming Jane Goodall's findings. So now we know that chimpanzees can be really violent, but they didn't necessarily know that in the 1940s. So, personally, I think Curious George is a chimpanzee. He is a chimpanzee based on knowledge that they had of them in the 1940s. Like, the only thing that didn't fit with him being a chimpanzee was his lack of aggression, and, well, they didn't know how violent chimps can be back then. So, yeah, that's what a chimpanzee is. Sounds like what Monkey Curious George is, a chimpanzee. Thank you for watching, everyone, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.